Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. I feel like it has been for forever since I've done a writing update, so I figured a writing update, that's what I'll do today. But of course you already knew that because of the title of the video. Moving on. I've been doing developmental edits on my Camino story. My plan for May was to get to the end of chapter 20. I'm currently about halfway through chapter 19. So I think I'll make it, as long as I don't get distracted tomorrow. I'll make it. I feel like through this round of editing, I've really figured out what I'm trying to achieve with the story in terms of the character's internal journey, and that's helping me be more confident with the beginning and ending of the story. The middle of the story has always been set in stone, but the precise details of the beginning and ending have always been a little bit vague to me, because I'm sure I've ranted about it in previous videos. Just generally, where do you start telling a story is always a question, and what kind of ending you want is always a big question. So those have always been quite plastic throughout the whole process, and I feel like I'm really settling into exactly what I want with them. I've written them, they still need a little bit of work, but I feel much more confident about them at the moment. A lot of the editing I've done previously has been focused on just cutting down description to bring my word count down because it's been such a Goliath project, but I feel like more and more my editing is also just strengthening the internal journey for my character. Now, instead of just keeping stuff that is interesting, I'm keeping stuff that is interesting and connects into other things. I'm asking myself that question of, what is the point of this? Why am I going to the effort of describing this? In some cases, I'm still keeping pointless things which don't necessarily contribute to plot or character development but are cool, but I'm trying to keep those to a minimum, like, you know, as a seasoning of extraneous detail rather than a novel of extraneous detail with a seasoning of plot. I've also been reading towards Compostela, Walking the Camino de Santiago, which I mentioned in a previous video. I've only read a little bit, like I'm up to 82 pages, and the main character, well actually it's memoir, so she is only on her second day of the Camino, like she's still in the Pyrenees. So it is incredibly different from what I've been working on, which of course I already knew it would be, right? Like, even though we're both writing stories about the Camino, they're going to be really different. So yes, I now have actual knowledge that that's the case because I've started to read it, but the other thing that's sort of happened from reading this is that I'm seeing how another author has handled certain things, like how to describe the beginning of setting out on the Camino and how she's incorporating the history and mythology of the Camino de Santiago into her book. And she's doing these things in a way that's very, very different from the way that I've done them, and I feel kind of more solid in how I'm doing this. Not because I've read this and gone, oh well that's shit, I'm really glad I didn't do it that way. It's just that I'm seeing the thing done in a different way and feeling more confident that I made the correct decision just for myself and my story and how it reads on the page, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it does, but I'm going to move on. In addition to working on developmental edits for my Camino story, I've also been thinking more and more about the family history story that I want to write. For those of you who are new, I think I've only mentioned it once or twice before, this is a story which was written by my grandmother as a collection of short stories, but it was never published, and then the draft was lost when she moved into a retirement home and now she's passed away. And I have always wanted to get those stories published. When I was very small and she was still around and the manuscript existed somewhere, I hoped to maybe help her edit it or write an introduction to it or something, but obviously as time has passed that has gone from that sort of just want to see the project exist in some way and I don't want credit, has had to move into, okay, I'm just going to have to take the reins and write the story from scratch kind of thing. I feel like I'm not talking coherently, but I've been interrupted by so many helicopters, neighbours and planes at this point. I'm just going to persevere despite the lack of coherency on my own part. So I've been thinking about this story a lot, and I think there are two things in particular which are really pushing to the front of my mind. The first is one which I've always been aware of, but I haven't done anything about, which is the fact that I'm going to have to do some consultation with this, because the moment I go even one generation back in my family, it goes from being a story about my immediate family to a story about my iwi. So I need to talk to people about that and get permission. This is very, very much a case of I need to have a plan and be able to discuss that plan and ask for permission in advance. It is in no way acceptable for me to just write the book and then apologise later if someone gets upset. That's just not how things are done. So I'm thinking more and more that I need to actually solidify a plan and actively seek out that consultation and discussion now, because some of the people I need to speak to are in their 90s, and the reality is that I cannot afford to procrastinate on this project much longer. It requires a lot of talking to strangers, so it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm just gonna have to be a big girl about it. The other thing that I feel is important before I go and have these conversations is to figure out exactly what I actually want to do with the stories in terms of how many generations back I want to go. And in some cases, there are stories which I heard just from my mum growing up, but they are technically her aunt's brother's story or something like that. And I mean, yes, technically that's family, but if it's a married-in aunt, then you could argue, well, it's not really someone that I'm descended from, so I have less claim on it than, say, mum's cousin would. I think that makes sense. So this is why I need to figure out exactly what I want to say and what stories I want to incorporate, so that I know who I need to speak to regarding getting permission and also just additional perspectives, because I think that's something I want to work into these stories, is the fact that it is an oral tradition that I'm trying to record, so there's going to be inconsistencies. Some people are going to be inclined to exaggerate things because it makes a good story. Others are going to play things down to try and, protect reputations and that kind of thing. So ultimately I can never actually find a truth. So I need to find a way of acknowledging that within the story. And something I've been thinking about doing when I write this story is telling it from a plural first person perspective. So it's not from I, it's from we. And I think this is possibly a good way of using the narrative itself as a way of acknowledging that this is a story that belongs to many people and has many storytellers, even if I am the specific one putting it down on paper. So I'm thinking about, what book is it? Oh, it's right here. I put it here in preparation of the video. Ages ago, I read The Buddha in the Attic. This is from the perspective of we. And I think this is kind of how I need to tell my family's story. So I'm just going to read the opening of this because it will demonstrate the point. Because I think when you say we as the perspective, people get confused. So the opening of this is: on the boat we were mostly virgins. We had long black hair and flat wide feet, and we were not very tall. Some of us had eaten nothing but rice gruel as young girls and had slightly bowed legs, and some of us were only 14 years old and were still young girls ourselves. And obviously it goes on. So the story is told from that plural first person perspective, and then it will name specific individuals and focus on small stories within the collective we's story. And I think that is the way to tell the Tales from the Coast. I think because it is it's our story, so I think having we as the narrator is the way to go forward. And I needed to make that decision, I think, before I could have conversations about exactly what I want to incorporate, because I think that realization is important and it will help communicate what I'm trying to do or something. I don't know. I do know, however, that my neighbours outside are starting to laugh loudly at intervals, and it's going to get harder and harder to edit out that. So I'm going to wrap this up here and hope it won't come across too awkwardly. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you're new around here, consider hitting subscribe and ringing that bell so you can stay up to date, and I'll see you next time. Bye.